Professor Shen Dingli, Professor Walter Andersen, and dear participants. Welcome to another nice webinar on China-US relations. Nepal Institute for International Cooperation and Engagement is an independent, apolitical, and non-partisan think tank which believes in freedom, democracy, and a world free from conflict. We envision a world where sources of insecurity are identified and understood, conflicts are prevented or resolved, and peace is advocated. China Studies is one of our major research centers. China Studies as a whole brings into perspective the rising powers, mounting economic, military, and diplomatic clout that certainly has the aptitude to enter, overturn, or sustain current contemporary world order. The center broadly examines China's international strategic thinking and conduct, foreign and security policy, and the impact of domestic politics and economy on China's foreign relations. It further addresses China's emergence in the face of the world in flux, domestic politics, economic, society, culture, People's Liberation Army, and Tibetan Autonomous Region, and most importantly, her engagement with each of South Asian countries. To talk on this very important and complex topic, we have two distinguished scholars from China and the US. I was fortunate to meet Professor Shen Dingli for the first time in 2016 December at Fudan University when I was working there as a visiting fellow. I also got an opportunity to listen to him several times in New Delhi at several occasions. Let me formally introduce Professor Shen Dingli. Professor Shen Dingli is a professor and former executive dean at Fudan University, Institute of International Studies, and former director of Fudan Center for American Studies. He's also an honorary visiting professor at Professor of Washington University in St. Louis. His research and publication cover China-US security relations, regional security and international security, arms control and non-proliferation, foreign and defense policy of China and the US. He's a vice president of China Association of South Asian Studies and Shanghai Association for American Studies. He received his Ph.D. in physics from Fudan in 1989 and his postdoc in arms control from Princeton University from 1989 to 1991. He was an Eisenhower Fellow in 1996 and advised in 2002. And then UN Secretary General Kofi Annan for his strategic planning. He is on the Global Council of Asia Society. He has co-edited 17 books and published over 2,500 papers and articles worldwide. The other speaker for today is Professor Walter Andersen. I got chance to meet him in Shanghai as well when I was working as a visiting scholar at Tongji University, another best university in Shanghai. Professor Walter K. Andersen is a professor of South Asian Studies, School of Advanced International Studies, Johns Hopkins University. Prior to joining SAIS, he served as chief of the US State Department's South Asian Division in the Office of Analysis for the Near East and South Asia. He has authored and published several books. The most important and recent is The Brotherhood in Saffron, RSS, and many others. Andersen earned his Ph.D. in political science from University of Chicago. As a part of his field trip, he lived in India for 4 years, for late 1960s through early 1970s. Then he came in contact with Akhil Bharatiya Vidyarthi Parishad, the student wing of RSS. That association led to an introduction of MS Golwalkar, the head of RSS. His scholarship has focused on the RSS and Indian politics. He considers Lloyd and Susan Rolfe as his mentor. May I request Professor Dingli to make his remark in 30, 35, or 40 minutes. I request our participants to drop their questions in the Zoom chat box or in the Facebook Live. Professor Dingli, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate Dr. Jeswal and your institute for inviting me. And I'm happy to be a cross-speaker with Professor Andersen, my old friend, and he is a real authority on South Asian issues. And he is also a big expert on China, India, South Asia. So I'm very happy to co-speak with him. And the subject I'm going to address is the future of China US relations. What I will be addressing is wrong, Walter, please fix my comments. China-US have a long history if I will talk about the future, I must talk about China-US relation today and what had happened in the past. China-US were linked by trade. The first president of US, George Washington, sent US naval vessel to China, renamed as China Prince. And they sailed to Guangzhou to start the two countries' formal relationship to trade. And the president went to New York to the harbor to welcome the ship sailing back to the US, and who bought $200 from the stuff the ship brought to China. 244 years ago, $200 meant a lot for all people in the US at that time. And the trade relationship keeps developing till today. What happened between China and US in the last few years, probably last year, China exported more than 500 billions of US dollar equivalent of Chinese goods to America, to Americans' customs statistics. And China may have imported some 130 billion US dollar equivalent of American goods to China. Comparing between the two sides, it's unbalanced. China imported about 1/3 or 1/4 of what it exported to US. But either side imported or exported significantly. It's more than 100 billion US dollar. Putting together two-way, in a combined way, more than 600 billion US dollar. We never see two countries trading at this magnitude. So Mr. Deng Xiaoping used to say, China-US relationship would not be too bad, cannot be too bad. He also said, cannot be too good. So we always think he is right, but lately, some of us thought that he is wrong. China-US relationship may be worse and worse, can be even bad, cannot be very bad. You will choose bad and worse. And this is happening in almost all fronts, all areas between the two countries. Xinjiang. China thought I need to use some effective way to fix those radical action, terrorism, separatism, to bring Xinjiang out of China through terrorist means. And before President Xi Jinping, the situation was not good. And when Xi Jinping took over power, the situation was also tense. Then we took some action, beating the terrorists, and also training people so they would have a sense, this is something you should not do. If you don't do, you can be better off. But US said, why you put people into the camp in an indiscriminatory way? And 1 million Uyghur, I don't know how many people, but some people say 1 million. So they think this is a big abuse of human rights. So US Congress has passed the law to sanction those Chinese officials who are supposed to be responsible for this phenomenon. Taiwan. China-US made a strategic decision. US switched diplomacy to Beijing, withdrawing armed force from Taiwan, cutting off US-Taiwan bilateral mutual defense agreement. And China also asked the US should never sell weapons to Taiwan. US refused. But based on the three agreements, US said yes, 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 US-China made official relationship on January 1st, 1979. But the two countries still had trouble for the lingering US weapon sale to Taiwan. It's unfinished. But the foundation, one of the foundation was US would not have active servicemen wearing American uniform and serving US government mission in Taiwan. But now both Taiwan and the US government have released the video that US Marine are in Taiwan to have the co-training, co-drill with Taiwanese military. US no longer cares, do it without telling it. US just do it and telling it, tell the mainland, I'm violating the foundation of China-US official relationship. And the US military transporter has flown over Taiwan's space, north-south direction, close to the mainland side, but which is a part of the territorial space. It's a military transporter. US naval ship, not a warship, but a research ship, has sailed into Taiwan's port. It is a Pentagon ship. So Marine, Navy, unarmed Navy, and active Air Force are in Taiwan. And our second man in the embassy to Washington, Mr. Lee, Consular Mr. Lee, spoke openly. The day when the US warship sails into Taiwan, that would be the day China would launch national unification warfare. So we're waiting for the US to send a military warship, not just a research ship. So China-US their relationship are deteriorating. Hong Kong. US believed China has violated its commitment of the one country, two system, to Hong Kong, to UK, to the UN, and to the entire world. Made in its joint declaration in 1984, which was deposited in the UN. China now says, it's my unilateral statement. It's not my commitment to the UK. So when Hong Kong was reverted to mainland in 1997, UK has no official role in Hong Kong. China has no need to consult with UK for whatever our policy change. So we have a change. The capital made a law, national security law for Hong Kong. It's not made by Hong Kong law council, legislature. But the US said, this is a violation of commitment. You imposed something on Hong Kong and without properly consulting with Hong Kong and others. China said, so what? I have never committed to anyone. I have a right to change. China admitted, yes, we changed. Therefore, US will sanction China. US has, Congress has already made its paper to sanction those top-level Chinese officials who are responsible for this, to cancel their visa and the visa of their family, and also to impose some financial sanction to these individuals. Probably they have some saving outside of China, and probably in the US, and the US would freeze their personal property if there is such. More evaluation of the impact on the US of this is being conducted. Secretary of State Michael what's the name? The Secretary of State, US Secretary of State, has made it clear that US government believed Hong Kong is now under one country, one system rule, no longer one country, two system.
Pompeo. His name is Pompeo.
Pompeo, yes. I'm getting old. Pompeo. China is calling him the common enemy of entire human being in the world. And trade. The two countries waged a trade war for 2 years, and on January 15th this year, they cut in Washington the first phase agreement on China-US economy and trade. And China committed for 2 years, this year, next year, we would increase our importation of US goods by $200 billion US. So in the past 2 years, China-US trade relationship was very turbulent. US initially 2 years ago targeted $3 billion US equivalent of Chinese goods to the US to give more punitive tariff, and China retaliated with 3 billion, then 50 billion US targeting China, China targeting the US 50 billion, but by this year, US has targeted entire Chinese export to US, 500 billion. US has not waived this additional tariff. Some of them has been as high as 25%, comparing with what was 2 to 3% 2 years ago. And China also targeted the US. At that time, last year, we targeted the US 80 billion US dollars, not the entire 130 billion US dollars. And now we have withdrawn most of them, have also returned the additional tax, the tariff, to those import and export. So China wants to show some good gesture. And now the US is very angry because of the corona. Because of corona, China may not commit to its early agreement for this unresistible natural disaster. So US wanted China to honor its agreement. But before corona, probably the incumbent president has a fair amount of chance to be re-elected because he seems to generate the US economy and business, stock market, his historical high. He said the unemployment rate was historically low for the past 60 years, way before President Clinton. But now, Q1, first quarter, US GDP declined 10% to 20%. China also declined 6.8%. And the US every day, in the last few days, additional 50,000 American people were determined to be infected with this coronavirus. And some say probably the real data is 100,000, not 50,000. And America has already contracted some 3 million toward 4 million of the total people who have been infected. The death toll of American people due to corona is already more than 130,000, almost the entire world. And American population is only 4% of the world. So President Trump's situation was very gloomy. Many survey of the popularity between him and Joe Biden have indicated Biden is leading all the 6 swing states by 10%, which means if US would conduct election today, Trump would be gone. So he is very angry, he is scared, and he wants to tell people it's due to China's fault that has brought American disaster. Because China has been trying to cover up, and China tried not to tell the WHO promptly. China wants to downplay the real situation in China that has misled the WHO and the US to stage proper early stage prevention. So it's due to China's fault. So you see, China, US, Xinjiang, Corona, Hong Kong, Taiwan, trade, Meng Wanzhou, Huawei's senior management who has been detained by Canada due to the US request. And high tech, US is boycotting Huawei globally. And probably India would follow for its own reason, whatever, but under the name of national security in the last 2 days. And finance. US has been trying to put a financial pressure on China. So all these are what's happening now. Some of those happened in the past, but never before all this are happening at one time at a very intense level. And all of them are very hard to de-escalate. China believes the top level leader in Taiwan, Madame Tsai Ing-wen, have been trying to move to push Taiwan toward independence. So we're not in a position to reduce our pressure. And the US say, you increase your pressure, I want to give more resource to Taiwan for its own defense. And the Hong Kong issue is very burning. And we don't know what the US will do in the next step. Some 150 US congressmen have made their coalition to propose US should use additional policy tool, including banning those nearly 3,000 Chinese officials who are the delegates to the 19th Party's Congress. These are not the people's delegate to NPC, but the party's Congress, some 3,000, to cancel their visa and the visa of their family, and to freeze all these people's wealth in the US, if some of them would have some. This is not a US policy, but this is flowing in the Congress. And the chance to be addressed by the floor is unknown. I would not say it would not have a chance to be passed. I also would not say it must be denied by the entire floor. So what's the reason? Deng Xiaoping said, relationship cannot be very bad. It can be very bad, but the relation today looks like a free falling body, descending, declining, without a limit. We only know tomorrow China-US relationship would be even worse. We only don't know how worse it will be, but it will be worse. How worse? 3 limits. First, China-US would cut off official relationship. The two countries established official relationship 41 years ago. Maybe in 1 or 2 years, the relationship would be cut off. Today, almost all people say it's not possible. But more and more bad things are happening. Except if this would happen, US, Taiwan would restore their official relationship. US need to choose one. If China would say, because the foundation is broken, so I do no wrong, you don't care China-US official relationship. Okay, let's maintain unofficial relationship. We can maintain some liaison office, like Taiwan is maintaining, like US-China used to maintain before 1979. I believe both countries don't want to have the relationship to decline to that level, but who knows? That must not happen. The third bottom line is a war. Some 20 years ago, China-US had an Air Force collision. Our F-8-2 and the US EP-3 collided in South China Sea in a place which is very close, which is 20 nautical miles outside of Hainan Island. So it's very close. China jet plane was pouring into the ocean and our pilot disappeared. And the US reconnaissance airplane was half broken. They have to land in China to save their life. Were not for the smart diplomacy between the country at that time, our country would have very bad relationship at that time. We had a very smart relationship. US issued a statement saying, I'm sorry. China translated it to nearly US is apologetic. So this is smart diplomacy, using ambiguous English and ambiguous Chinese. So our language are not the best language. French language may be the best. We saved our relationship. But now, given our two governments, both are very, very emotional. Who knows? Both would be able to restrain itself properly when a collision, a naval collision. A few years ago, when the US naval ship was sailing in South China Sea, a Chinese destroyer cut into it. So it was very close, probably by 100 meters to the US ship. If it would not stop, if the US ship would not turn around, they would collide. And it's intentional collide. You cannot say it's unintentional. And US is still conducting reconnaissance mission close to China. And China must continue to send its aircraft, trying to dissuade the US plane to leave the place, which is so close to China. US naval ship is not only close to those 7 artificial islands or islets China made in the last few years. US is also sailing them to the territorial water of Shisha Chundang Plateau, not a separate plateau, where there is no ambiguous, because these are the natural islands. These are not artificial rock. US reason is innocent passage. Yes, US is entitled, but China feels offended. Who knows? Someday when people feel offended, they cannot control themselves, then bad thing can happen. So at this time, I would say China-US relationship is still, maybe it's no longer sweet and sour. Now it is very bitter, very bitter. It has not reached the worst stage, but every day we are moving toward that possible stage. If both leaders would not rein in themselves to exercise self-restraint. If we don't have exchange, don't call, don't meet, and China-US has lost dialogue, strategic dialogue. At George W. Bush took power, he consolidated some dialogue, but today, zero active dialogue. And the two government spokespersons, Chinese foreign minister spokesperson, White House spokesperson, and the President Trump also served as a White House spokesperson as a Chinese virus. He changed, and according to WHO norm from 1955, when we discovered the new virus, we should name the virus with year, with its scientific background of country. And American people were educated. It's China's. Democrats and Republicans almost disagree on anything, on making a war between Mexico and the US, on kicking out those kids of those parents who come to US illegally. They almost all disagree. President Trump disagrees with anything President Obama would say, would do. And these days, Democrats almost disagree with this president, but they agree on one thing, that is China. US had a consensus. President Clinton's decision to let China into the WTO is a strategic mistake. By waiting China for 15 years, China would become a market economy, and China would return the goods to the world, US and to everyone. It's a failed promise and hope. I cannot. Any question to me at this time? If not, I will continue.
So please continue. There was some disturbance.
Yeah, I do not know if it's a question to me. If not, I will continue.
Please continue.
Now, this may have become a consensus of America. It's a huge mistake to make China into the WTO, to have a membership. And China now is a mix of market economy and a central economy. China is not a pure market economy. US does not expect China to be a pure market economy, but China is pushing the envelope to let the state-owned planned economy to be dominant. Then China can use the national resource to flex its muscle to claim international leadership, because the government has lots of resources to do Belt and Road and to do Asian infrastructure investment bank, etc. While the US is spending money for anti-terror war, US is shrinking, US is not very much interested in investing around to improve relationship with its allies, is intimidating NATO and other friends. And China is smiling, spend money, and expanding its influence. And the US is unhappy to this because US may think China sees the wealth through a lie, not to live to its promise to get money through market economy. And China may have stolen the US intellectual property rights, and China become rich. So this is a US view. And unfortunately, this is becoming the mainstream US view. Lots of those China hand, they may not love China, but at least they would talk about China in objective way. Now I see many of such people are not saying things, and they may have some fear, or they may realize, come to the realization, China become the #2 world economy through improper, unfair competition. So how to beat China? Negotiate with China through trade war, and give Taiwan weapon to train Taiwan to attack mainland, don't chorus Taiwan. To sanction Chinese officials for their action in Xinjiang and in Hong Kong. US has also been saying to withdraw visa to those Chinese who have some military background. So probably there are some 3,000 to 5,000 Chinese graduate students studying in the US, and probably at the university, Professor Andersen is there, You may not know which students may have a military background, but the US intelligence may know. So they would be deprived of a US visa to be forced to leave the US with a very complicated view. They like you, they like America, and they may or may not have some background. But even with this background, they may not continue to have the background. They may stay in the US forever to change its citizenship or return to China to join Fudan University that has no military background. But the USA, because you used to have, you have to leave. This is, China may have some 360,000 students in the US. This is 0.1% of all Chinese studying in the US. Then for the other 999 out of 1,000 Chinese students living in the US, they are scared. They still like the US, but they think US no longer welcomes them. I taught at the Colorado College Chinese Foreign Policy this January, February. I returned to China in March. Chinese students there, they tell me some people on the campus become very emotional to these Chinese students. They shouted, "You Chinese student, you have a disease." Well, disease is a natural thing, not a person is a disease. This kind of unfriendly environment, even on campus. So I would come to my concluding part. What would happen in the future? A mix. Many Chinese still like America. But when they see the video, American military is in Taiwan, it's very hard to tell them America is friendly to China. Maybe Professor Andersen is friendly to China. He may or may not be friendly to Chinese government, but he may be friendly to Chinese students, or to me at least. But for me to educate our people, our students, America lives up to its agreement not to have active service military people on the island. I cannot say that because that is not the fact. And Chinese side think there are lots of social disturbing turbulence in Hong Kong last year. So when we have this national security law, we only beat 4 crimes: terrorism, subverting central government, and kind of working with foreign diplomats in Hong Kong with a purpose to separate Hong Kong from China, and some other destabilizing behavior. So for most Chinese, even for Hong Kong legislature, they should be in position to make their own law to disallow this kind of illegal things. American government would not allow American people to work with our embassy with a purpose to talk with US government. American government would not allow any people in the US, Chinese or American, to stage terrorism to undermine US national security. So these 4 legitimate items of crimes is something Hong Kong should not allow from day one, from 1997, through making law, hopefully by their own members of the legislature. But they failed to do for 23 years. So it's hard to blame us. We should wait for them for another 27 years. So in total, 50 years, we would do nothing. We say 1 country, 2 systems. Yes, 2 systems, but still 1 country. No terrorism, no radicalism, no subversion, no bad behavior, undermining national security. But in the meantime, we should not abuse the law to put some irrelevant behavior to brand them as undermining national security and triggering one of the 4 crimes. So we should have a balance. America may have the legitimate concern, and China should soothe not only America and all people, Hong Kong people, their legitimate concern. They have a right to to have the dissent, to be different, to be critical, as long as that would not fall into the one of the four categories of the crimes. So we in the future, if China can act in a decent, lawful way, probably we would still be able to disarray Hong Kong, some Hong Kongese, American, and UK people and their government. So China-US relationship after a while may improve. And after a while, America would not find those Chinese students in the US without a military background, who would not do espionage. So America would still welcome them. So I hope this is a turbulent time. China-US will be able to navigate our relationship to override the current turbulence. And US should live up to its honor, not to have the official relationship with Taiwan, including political and military relationship. China-US should not just blame, to use loudspeaker to demonize the other side. Even if we don't like, we still should talk using Zoom, telephone, and meet if possible. Like Mr. Yang Jiechi went to Hawaii to meet with Mr. Pompeo. To agree, we would still honor the first phase China-US economic and trade agreement to give the confidence to US. President Trump needed, he needed for saving his election in the swing state. We do it not as a personal favor. It has nothing to do with him. It is due to our negotiation. The paper cutting is our promise. It's good for America, for American business, for American agriculture. If it's good for Trump, that has nothing to do with us. We don't intervene into the US domestic politics. Don't honor to be in favor of Joe Biden, to honor as a personal favor to Trump, nothing to do. So we should tell American people, we live to our honor, we live to our promise. We still want to sustain probably the last two areas we can cooperate. China-US trade relationship and China-US joint effort to stabilize Korean Peninsula, to punish North Korea whenever it would shoot another missile, stage another test, and to encourage North Korea to give carrot, to give incentive to North Korea whenever it would work with us, observing those UN and IAEA resolution. We are a big country. We have a responsibility, no matter we have problem directly, bilaterally or not. We should make sure Northeast Asia will be stable. South China Sea will be stable. China-Japan, East China Sea relation will be stable. And China-India relation will be stable. India may refuse American to mediate and China may refuse. But we may still appreciate they have a heart they want us to be peaceful. And we should let them to feel not to have much concern because we're able to cut a paper and to honor the paper, to disengage, to define the area of dispute. And both military should withdraw from the defined area of dispute as quickly as possible. So therefore, America would think China is a responsible Asian power and India is able to make itself secure, so America does not need to mediate. So I don't think this is the end game. We should expect China-US to have the three worst outcome. We should save our relationship to lift them step by step from President Trump. And if he has a second term, we should continue to work with him. If another person would be the next US president, that would may have more chance, because he did not lead the US to collide with China in this way. And China should work with whoever who is in the White House to help our cultural education exchange, to help Middle East, Northeast Asia, and South Asia secure and peaceful, to make Taiwan stable, to make Hong Kong to ride out initial stage when many stakeholders would have a concern. This is my kicking out talk. Probably I used too many minutes. And Professor Andersen may fix where you disagree with me. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Shen Dingli. May I now request Professor Walter Andersen to make his remarks?
Well, I will keep my remarks maybe a little less than what I was asked, because actually people are here because, and I'm here because of you. I want to hear what you say, since I have great respect for your views. Your end of the talk, you ended somewhat optimistically, and I happen to be somewhat optimistic as well for reasons I'll mention in the relationship of our two countries. And I was also asked to so bring in India into this, into the relationship of India as well, but particularly in the U.S. and China, given their status in the world, both economically and strategically, have to work with each other. I think you alluded to that in your comments. There may be and will be areas and issues of disagreement, rather strong disagreement in some cases, but I think war is impossible. I mean, these are nuclear weapons powers, all three of them, as a matter of fact, India, US, and China, who have platforms that could attack the other country if they wanted to or were attacked by the other one. So I think that makes war quite unlikely. There will be pinpricks along the way, there are now, and a sense of the situation is not what it should be. But I think that for reasons I'll mention in a few minutes, I think that there is a strong reasons why the disagreements will be a certain restraint of them. And I think you were talking about that as well, because of both their economic power and security power. Let me just give a kind of anecdote of something that happened last night. I was, 4th of July, is a US national birthday, and they tend to show old movies. And they were showing old World War II movies, in which the Chinese are portrayed in a really very flattering way. As these are our allies, they are our friends. The Chinese and the US citizens have much in common. They both had to throw off, colonial subjugation, and there was the strong US support of the Chinese fight against the Japanese in the Second World War. Quite a difference from much of the popular feeling today that you have regarding China. There's just a few things you asked for me to give areas where potential disagreement before I give sort of kind of more formal remarks, which I'll keep short. And that is on polling. You had mentioned polling. You have to be very careful about polling. When the last US presidential election, Trump was behind Hillary Clinton by the same percentage he is behind. In fact, it was more than what he is behind Biden today. That can change. And the usual, record on US elections is that the voters really many of voters make up their minds in the last few months. And we're entering that period now. So I think you have to be very careful on when you use polling as to who the American people will or will not support. Everyone thought that Trump was going to lose, and he actually won in terms of the Electoral College, and I won't go into that. It's a peculiar American way of holding elections that goes back to the 18th century to ensure that states, particularly small states, have a significant voice. And Trump won, significantly in that. So I think, you have to be very careful about that. Regarding Chinese students, I teach at a university, Johns Hopkins, and a part of it, the School of Advanced International Studies, which has a very large Chinese student presence. And in fact, I had a China-India program, which I ran there. And I know from my own, knowledge of the students and what they want to do, most of the Chinese students I know want to come back. And then Professor Shen Dingli and myself have a student from Fudan, who's now a doctoral student, who's at Berkeley, who spent some time with me this past December, who actually enjoys his experience very much and is worried that somehow the situation between the two countries could make it so that he would have to go back. He is a kind of representative of China, a very decent, good person, and a smart person, one of the smartest students I've ever taught, who gets behind slogans and the veneer of issues. I truly hope that someday he will play a major role in China as he intends to come back. He comes from a relatively poor farm family. He was raised by his grandfather in a village who really infused in him a sense of achieving something in life. And if the Chinese system has a high point in it is it enables people from that background to advance through the system to achieve something. U.S. also has that as well. In fact, in that sense, our two countries are quite similar in that they do provide an opening for people to advance through their systems. Neither one has a royalty or an aristocracy. China had once had that, but that no longer exists. The U.S. never did. And so, on that, we have a certain, sort of commonality in what we do. Well, I'm pleased to appear, on this forum with Professor Shen Dingli. I got to know Professor Shen when I was a guest lecturer, graduate lecturer in international relations at Tongji University, which, for those of you who know Shanghai, is just down the road from Tongji. The two schools have different origins, and Professor Shen will know more about Fudan than I, but Tongji was actually started by German Lutheran missionaries in 1905. It still has a very strong German influence. In fact, when I first asked for a dictionary, Chinese dictionary, somebody brought me a Chinese-German dictionary because it's assumed that I had to be German. Now, I do know German, but I'm not German, and it has that. Whereas Fudan has an American Methodist background, and it's somewhat a few years older. And I've long felt that, that kind of long connection with the U.S., was somewhat instrumental in the formation of what has been China's major think tank, I think, and that is the Americas Institute, which Professor Shen Dingli really built into a major institution of significance in addressing common issues between the U.S., China, and international relations. He headed the institute when I met him, and through that I got to meet other faculty members at Fudan and have been kept in contact with them as well. I can tell you, having met some of these faculty members at Fudan, I can tell you that Professor Shen his students loved him. They really did. He spent time with his students. And that part of the world, unfortunately, many faculty members don't, but he did. And there are a few others I know, but he stands out as a person who gave time and attention to students and their efforts to develop and to get scholarships and to travel overseas. He was a star in Shanghai's world of international relations scholars. And he introduced me to some of that world in Shanghai. He also lectured my students from Johns Hopkins, the students in my China-India courses. He was so popular that at the end of his hour-and-a-half lecture, and he probably remembers this, the students asked him to continue. They wanted him to say more on China's foreign policy, particularly as it related to South Asia, and he almost invariably did so, and I thank him for that. Now, while I was in China, there was an optimistic sense of an improvement in the relations between both India and China. And I always taught one of my courses at Tongji was always Indian foreign policy on the one hand, and China and the US on the other. But as Professor Shen has noted, that's been replaced by a sense of apprehension over where the relationship is going, and the challenges seem to be rising. And I'll briefly address some, and he has addressed them as well. At that time, we tended to focus in our conversations, and in fact, in the many lunches that I have to thank Professor Shen for organizing for me, as well, sometimes private lunches, which were always fascinating. We talked about potential areas for greater cooperation. Today, if we were to have another lunch, such as the ones we used to have, we'd probably be talking about how to avoid confrontations, a different orientation, a different outlook. And in South Asia, especially over the last several weeks, we're focused on violent confrontations over who controls strips of territory in the Himalayan border region. But the dispute in the Himalayas is only part of a larger set of challenges that the three countries face in East Asia and South Asia. And I wanted to briefly take a look at two of those challenges because they reflect, I think, what are the issues at stake. Chinese claims to the South China Sea as within what it calls the 9-dash line area has been a source of problems. And these claims are, I just lost a copy of my face. Can you still see me? Am I still visible?
Yes.
Yes,
I can't
can
see.
see.
Okay, maybe that's a good thing. But anyway, these claims are rejected by all the border states on the South China Sea and have created problems. I think of recent problems that have led the Philippines, for example, to decide to retain the agreement they had for the stationing of US troops and equipment in the Philippines. They just made that decision shortly, and it had to do with problems with China in the South China Sea. And almost all the others have had problems as well in accepting this. This claim was also rejected in the 2016 International Court of Justice. It's very important that the trade lanes through the South China Sea, which is why, the US for a long period of time has taken a keen interest in those trade lanes staying open, because much of the world's trade goes through those trade lanes, especially, as we think of trade to Japan and South Korea, and they use the South China Sea trade lanes. The US, for this reason, Professor Shen Dingli, briefly touched on this, has carried out freedom of navigation operations through the South China Sea and replacing the British, who did that before them. I think it was the 1980s, so Professor Shen can correct me on the date for that. But the US replaced the British in doing this, and they do it periodically. And in fact, just today, 2 aircraft carriers, as part of this exercise, freedom of navigation exercises, have sailed into the South China Sea. But China has so far been ambiguous, I think wisely so, and Professor Shen mentioned this about both the values and issues involved in ambiguity as to what legally it claims means, and has so far not imposed an air zone over its claims in the South China Sea. And I think this is very wise for not to do so. The second example that I want to mention is the tense Sino-Indian border standoff along their respective Himalayan frontier. The tension has taken place in areas where there's a long-standing dispute over where the line of actual control is located. Such disputes have taken place in the past, periodically, but there are several differences now that make this dispute more dangerous. First is that the tensions have taken place simultaneously, over the several hundred miles in the northwest, in what the Indians refer to as the Ladakh area of that country. While both sides have been careful to avoid gunfire, in fact, they haven't used gunfire for decades now, and they have sort of enforced that, there have been a large number of casualties recently. And on the June the 15th tensions, the Indians say that 20 of their soldiers were killed. Others say that there's an unknown number of Chinese who were also killed. Third difference is that a comparatively higher level of force deployment has taken place at areas of tension, and that always has a potential danger because the forces can be used, sometimes accidentally, sometimes deliberately. Another difference is that the Indians, in a sense, have copied the Chinese in building infrastructure from into the border area, which means that troops and equipment can be moved more quickly than before. Now, there's a certain danger in all of that on both sides, in that they can move troops and equipment in ways that can enhance confrontation between the two sides. I recall a colleague of mine at Tongji telling me that if I was to understand Chinese foreign policy, in fact, the Chinese view of the outside world, one had to put it in the context of China's 100-year humiliation from the outside, something that it was determined, has been determined, that should not be repeated. And I think that's a good point to keep in mind. But the same could be said of India. It had an even longer period of humiliation and resulted in a colonization of all the subcontinent. In China, only part of China was effectively colonized. And I lived in Shanghai, where one has a living sense of what was the French quarter, what was this quarter, what was that quarter, and which in both countries, the fancy European clubs would not allow Chinese to come into the clubs, a major humiliation that in their own country that they couldn't make use of those clubs. So I think in both cases, you have two countries which have a strong sense of their value and their role in the world. They're two ancient civilizations. In fact, the two oldest civilizations in Asia, and have a sense of themselves. And until recently, were two civilizations that contributed to each other and in which there was a sense of harmony across the Himalayan mountains. You have a prime minister in India who is a nationalist, very much of a nationalist, Narendra Modi, and his party is a nationalist party, determined that India will not give up territory, that it considers legitimately its own. And there we have an issue, a possible issue of confrontation with China. At the same time, Modi and his party, the Bharatiya Janata Party, have been very careful not to mention the president of China. In fact, Modi has tried since he became prime minister 6 years ago to keep up a contact with President Xi. And they have met each other, over a dozen times in one capacity or other, sometimes, most recently at Wuhan, a two-person set of meetings. I think they genuinely like each other. And I think they, given the political party from which Modi is from, they tend to look east more than west for their future collaboration. And this is a real opening to China's relationship with India. When Modi in his last visit to Wuhan went to China, I'm told that he dragged President Xi to every temple they could find in that city and elsewhere. He's probably never been to so many temples in his life as he was. But what it reflected was Modi's sense of appreciation of Chinese culture and its contributions to both Indian culture and their contributions to China. If you ever go, and I would recommend people do this, if you ever go to the Shanghai Museum, one of the great museums in the world, it has a large section there about Buddhism. And many of the objects have Sanskrit statements on it because Sanskrit was used by many of the Chinese Buddhists and others as a holy language in which to read and recite some of the scriptures. So it amazed me, and my Indian wife appreciated, seeing that sense of the collaboration, cultural collaboration between India and China. given this difference over the slices of territory, I think what's absolutely essential between India and China is to work out where the actual line of control is located, come to an agreement on that. There are now several places along this line where there's disagreement, and the most recent confrontation, in fact, involved movement of troops and equipment in areas the other claim because there's no set yet of what that is precisely. I think this has to be done. They simply have to sit down and come to some kind of agreement, because if that does not happen, I will predict there will be future problems as well between the two countries. Now, I think a stable relationship between India, China, and the US is necessary if a number of critical world problems are to be addressed seriously. And among the more important of those is the issues we now face regarding health issues and the pandemic. There will be future health issues which we need to face because of, the world has become more connected with each other. Rules of trade are important, particularly as trade increases. And despite all this, word about looking inward, it's not possible anymore. You're going to have trade. Climate control is absolutely essential, as there is, a warming in the world climate, and countries have to work together to handle that. Nuclear proliferation and arms control, areas that were Professor Shen's, original interest. And I don't know whether you mentioned it, Professor Jaiswal, but Professor Shen is by training a physicist. When I first heard that, I was, both amazed and surprised as to why he went into a totally different area from physics. And he mentioned that international relations is far more interesting and in some ways more complicated, because you have to make decisions, whereas in physics, in many places, only one answer to what you want. And, I found that interesting. He still has a very scientific mind of looking at data to come up before you, reach a conclusion. Now, the involvement of India, China, and the US on the issues that I just mentioned are important because of the continuing economic and strategic importance on the world stage of these two countries. The US and China are likely to remain the world's number one and number two economic power, and there's some disagreement as who is one and who is two, but they are likely to remain. And once this pandemic is over in India is again, and its leaders have said so, are going to strive for 8-9% annual economic growth rate. And if that's the case, it's only a matter of time, perhaps by mid-century, when India becomes either the third or the fourth largest country in the world. All three countries, in addition, are nuclear armed and possess the platforms to deliver nuclear weapons to the other. Therefore, I think war is an impossibility for them, because any war would involve enormous destruction of the various countries. Now, there are internal political differences in all three countries, but they all possess a strong sense of nationhood. And in the case of India and China, a sense of being part of an ancient civilization. But cooperation will be difficult to achieve unless several issues are addressed. And I would be interested in Professor Shen's perspective on how this could be done. First is there has been a loss of trust for whatever reason, maybe right, maybe wrongly, in China, both in India as well as in the US. And in the Indian case, you've seen, and Professor Jaiswal, you probably have seen it there in India itself, where there's been a kind of spontaneous outpouring of anti-Chinese sentiment, particularly as the various soldiers were taken home and buried in their home places. And in fact, the political opposition, both in India and in the US, have demanded even tougher action toward China than the leadership was willing to do. Second is that these three countries need to cooperate on practical steps to address the global issues that are confronting us all. And the most immediately pressing issue is the development of a vaccine that would contain the spread of the virus. And this is a perfect area for cooperation that would have an effect on how people think of other people. And the third is to determine whether existing international institutions are capable of achieving the desired outcome. And if not, work out the formation of institutions that can do so. So I'll leave my comments there. And I think Professor Shen, as always, it was very stimulating. I hope that to hear his reaction to some of the comments I made or any of the speakers that people who are participating in this meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Andersen. I agree with what you said about Professor Shen Dingli. The first professor I met at Fudan was Professor Shen Dingli, and he introduced me to amazing scholar of Fudan and in Shanghai, with whom I keep engaging. Like he introduced me Professor Jiadong and all from Center for South Asian Studies, and we still have this kind of engagement. We have regular programming. Last month we had one joint program between NICE and South Asian Studies. Actually, I do not used to have very high regards for Chinese scholar, because I'm not a Mandarin speaker, and there are very few who can really express their ideas in English. But when I went to Shanghai and met Professor Dingli and many of us, that perception changed, and that is how I start engaging and I started reading about them. At the same time, Shanghai also welcomed me, being a non-Mandarin speaker. The city welcomed me because I was able to sustain without knowing a single Mandarin word. Later on, when I came back from Beijing to Shanghai, I feel like I'm coming back home. So I really have a good feeling about that city, and I try to visit once in a year at least. I was supposed to be there in March, but there was pandemic and all. We have lots of questions, so I think without wasting time, let me run through them. Professor Dingli, how do you want to get, like, maybe club 3 or 4 questions? Maybe you have to unmute yourself, sir. Please unmute yourself. Professor Dingli, please unmute yourself. Yes. Would you like to club the questions or maybe one by one?
Walter has raised the 3 issues. Before I would forget, probably let me address Walter's 3 issues first.
Sure.
First is China-India, how to work on their trust. In my view, 1, 2, 3. First, the 2 countries have not made a consensus about the line of actual control. India may never know what's in China's mind about China's line of actual control. So when you don't know each other's line of actual control, how you can say, I have invaded you, because I may still be inside where I define as my territory. But the other side would think, this is my territory. So first step is define an area of dispute. Draw a line. You think this is yours, this is mine, but we must have some overlapping disagreement. That is consensus. We disagree. So let's define area of disagreement. And then disengage, bring the 2 military out of this area to make this area as a DMZ. DMZ is a Cold War thing, but may apply here. Both China and India should not put any military inside the area of disagreement. Let our police, civil government to manage it. Step 1, step 2, try to define the line of actual control based on the disagreement. Let's work on agreement. That your line, my line. Second step. Third, making reasonable giving and taking. India say, I must take this. China say, no, this is mine. India say, no. So let's say no, and finally we decide, you take this, I take that, to make a final border. So this is my view. Probably let's do this engagement within 2 years. Another 2 years negotiation to define the line of actual control, but there are 2 different lines, your line and my line. And finally cut a border inside, between the 2 lines. India gets more for this part, and China gets more in that part. It's like a swap or exchange or giving and take. So if I were leader, I think it's not very much challenging. We should be ready to give. not mine is mine, your is mine, then you are never ready to give. So this is the first question to yours. I also hope my president and Indian leader would get something useful from my idea. Second, China-US vaccine. Great. But because this is very crucial to national security. Because US every day has 50,000 new people to be confirmed for infection. The effective vaccine would have the key to this national security. US is worried China would steal the US technology. Despite the Canadian challenge for Meng Wanzhou and the two Michaels, China, Canada are cooperating on vaccine. That's good. But the US, China are not cooperating. Probably there are a few Chinese research team, medical team, each is working on it 24 hours a day. They're racing with time in order to be the first to get the vaccine approved. So Chinese will be totally saved. Otherwise, we cannot leave China. We can stay in China safely, but we cannot travel to outside of China safely. And if you get this, you can give Africa, then they would appreciate. President Xi Jinping has already promised when China would attain this vaccine, we would, in the first place, share this with every country. And also probably they would have less unpleasantness for China's initial slow of providing information of the disease. Some of them claim China was slow. But when China would give this for free or no interest just to get the pay for the cost, I think people would feel this country is most reliable to provide global public health good. So China-US must have such a race for national security of public health, and also to set our respective global image. We are the world medical science leader. This would make our two countries to race in an unhelpful way. We are not cooperating. So I would also hope why national development of such a vaccine is natural. We should also let a University Harvard to Beida and Fudan University to another American medical school to have the joint research. Care less about the science patent, how much money we can get from this discovery, but with the global interest to save the world. Our two economic power have the conscience and responsibility to save the world. I hope President Trump and my president will listen to us. Third, what international regime we can help or propose? This is the first question from the audience, whether China want to have a totally different world order. I would say the world order keeps change, no matter you want to change or not. America want to retain the order in which America is the leader. But this order would make America to sell weapons to Taiwan, American military people in Taiwan without wearing uniform. So China thinks this order is not good, because my sovereignty, my faith, my interest to unify a part of China cannot be successful. So China must want to change the order. 10 years ago, when people say, if China is a status quo power or is a power to challenge the status quo, China said, I'm a status quo. I don't want to change the world. It's a lie. China must want to challenge the order, because with this order, China cannot unify its country. But what if beyond? China want to get the Vladivostok, we call Haisenwai, and Russia celebrated the making of the city in Russian language, Vladivostok, 160 years ago. Russian embassy in Beijing celebrated online, and that hurt the Chinese. because you stole, you defeated us, you forced us to cut an agreement, you killed tens of thousands Chinese. We cannot accept. But this is a status quo. China cannot undo the status quo, but we feel shamed by the status quo. We know in reality we cannot, but our heart is broken. So China wants to change, but Russia has thousands of pieces of nuclear weapons. You cannot change. We have to accept. Not all world order is good. When it's not good, you want to change. When you have the muscle, you change. But other countries feel they have get this for 160 years. They cannot accept this order to be undone. So let's be frank. All world order has its rationality with its fairness or unfairness. Let's try not to undo the world fair, to make the unfair world order to be undone by muscle. Let's use political means, use reconciliatory means, use diplomatic means. Let's talk. So China say, India took my land. Maybe this is true, but we should be ready. India may not give in any inch of the land. China should also be ready for this. But India said, why you take Aksai It's not yours. But China has muscle. Why India complain? India should be ready that this world order, regional order would never be changed. But what if we make a compromise? You take some in Aksai, we give some in Aksai, we take some in Arunachal, you give something in Zhangnan, South Tibet. Let's make a diplomacy to have faith. You get some, I give some, you give some, I get some. And say, let's keep this for 50 years. For 50 years, this order would not be changed. And even if we want to change in the future, never use military, don't shoot muscle, use smile. So China want to change the status quo in Taiwan. But before we have done it, US would reinforce the status quo. No way. China want to lift its voting power in the World Bank from number 3 to number 2. The World Bank is not equal. It is even not like a UN Security Council. The more money you have, the more voting power you have, the more powerful you are. And China is number 3. But our GDP is number 2. PPP is number 1. US say, no more reform. Whatever China's economy would grow, no chance you would be promoted as number 2 in voting power in the WTO, in World Bank and in IMF. So US is unwilling to accommodate China for the legitimate change, peaceful change of world order. So China launched its own bank. It's a regional bank, Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. China is a governor. China saying, I can have some 25% of voting power and no other can have this. China have designed a new world order that China is number 1. But Japan has Asian Development Bank. So we have in Asia, these 3 banks, US lead 1, US Japan co-lead 1, and China lead 1. China is smallest, but over time it can be the second biggest. So this is a subtle change of the regional and world financial order, and it's peaceful. And country start to accept it because you get money from institution, and rich country through the money granting international institution don't affect you directly. They don't give you money directly. They give money through a financial institution. So it's multilateral, far better than bilateral or unilateral. So this is China is learning. America created this world order 75 years ago. So 70 years later, I try to learn with a small scale. But after another 30 years, by 2050, China may be the biggest economy in the world. If China wanted the presidentship of the World Bank, how US would deny to cater. So this kind of thing happens constantly. But for me, don't worry if this happens. Second, happen peacefully in a way that benefits everybody. benefited the one who would rise and benefited other stakeholder. And the major stakeholder, Japan, US, India, and China should talk. We should have a consortium of power talk. So every country would feel happy. US feels unhappy, China launched AIIB. US feel unhappy, China pushed the Belt and Road. If China would consult with India about CPEC, Pakistan may be unhappy. It's a China-Pakistan bilateral thing. Why you consult with India? Because India consider it cut through the Pakistan occupied Kashmir, which should never belong to Pakistan. So India is stakeholder. So this kind of forceful push of single-minded change of regional order and world order gives lots of positive development, but at the same time induce suspicion, erode trust. So I would urge, if this would be replayed, consulting with Japan, consulting with US, consulting with India, if India would do something, Belt and Road, consulting with Pakistan, because Pakistan would think the Indian occupied Pakistan should never belong to Pakistan. So why China would work with India to build a road? It's an illusion of Pakistan's sovereignty, even though they don't occupy the place. So China should consult with Pakistan. Even China would make a bilateral infrastructure development in the questioned area. Through this kind of soft politics, rather than forceful push of one country's idea, I think Asia should be able to avoid the Thucydides trap, but to have a multilateral power consortium kind of a balance. So every country don't feel I lose, I am respected. So this is my view to your third question, how we can contribute to the future development of world order. I'm sorry to speak for too long.
Yes, let's move to the questions. We have lots of questions. How do you see US-China relation unfolding if Trump is re-elected, and how different would it be if he is not elected? Second question is very similar. If the Democrats win the election, what do you think the Sino-American relation will be? Moving to second question, what is way forward to check Chinese assertiveness in East China Sea? And the other is, how far will US raise its voice or take measures in support of freedom of navigation in South China Sea? Maybe you can respond this and we'll come to another set of questions.
Should I respond first?
Yes.
China's view on the issue of East China Sea might be different from the person who raised the question, because we don't think we are assertive. Taiwan is a part of China. Taiwan is in East China Sea, because Taiwan area is in East China Sea. China-Japan links in East China Sea. And we know primarily that an issue of Diaoyu Island. And Diaoyu Island becomes a part of Taiwan 600 years ago in the Yuan dynasty. And 100 years ago, Japan defeated us in torpedo our Qing dynasty navy, went to reinforce the Qing dynasty army in Korea, and Japan constituted a provocation, launching a naval war against China, and they won. And we lost our benefit, and we cut Taiwan. Taiwan is a part of China, and Diaoyu Island is dynasty. Japan defeated us, took Taiwan, and America and China defeated Japan. America helped us to revert Taiwan Island. But America took Diaoyu Island for its Air Force ranging, dropping free-falling bomb for its X kind of training. So America did not revert Diaoyu Island to Taiwan immediately. But when Japan-China was improved relationship, US-China improved relationship in 1971, US mistakenly or intentionally or strategically decided to revert Diaoyu Island to Japan. So it's not a problem between China and Japan. It is America has generated an issue between China and Japan. China and Japan decided to share this in the backyard. Don't touch it. So Chinese have agreed within 50 nautical miles of the island's close water, our fishing boats would not enter. And Japan would not enter 12 nautical miles, at least for the strictly defined territorial water, Japan would not enter. And China even yield more fishing rights. So this is how China and Japan have, at the government level, decided to use politics, negotiation. We cannot settle the issue, but at least we would not make it a big issue. It's due to the Tokyo prefecture's governor. A few years ago, he announced the prefecture would nationalize this island because it's owned by private Japanese. China disagreed, but China decided not to make it an issue. But the regional government, even not the central government, decided to nationalize. That has make this very heated issue. And China and Japan have made a military to military kind of a security mechanism. How to avoid the air collision, the naval collision in this area. So we have the code of conduct by this time. So let me conclude. There is no such an issue of China's assertiveness in East China Sea. In our view, then it's an issue. Japan was aggressive, grabbing Taiwan, grabbing Diaoyu Island, and they were forced to return Taiwan. It's Americans' help. But China still tried to peacefully coexist with Japan, leaving this issue untouched. Japan's central government want to work with us, but the regional local government, it's very unfortunate. But when this happened, Chinese people would push our government, and the Japanese people would push the central government. The two governments still managed to make it two military, two naval, two air force not to collide. So this is my answer to the so-called question, China's East China Sea assertiveness. No such a thing.
There was also a question on South China Sea and like what would the impact on US-China relation if Trump is elected and if Trump is not elected or either Democrat is elected?
No one knows. No one knows. China-US relations have a pattern. When it's good, because good is for each other's interest. When it is not good, because not good would be in each other's interest. Because in the US, if it continues to be good, you think China steals the US technology. And Huawei would dominate. It has a backdoor, US perception. And the backdoor, it would look at what is your message. Probably transported to Beijing, and China would know what you are conversing. Your national security would be broken. This is US perception, I understand. I would also have the perception, if the US business would lay 5G network in China, I would also have the concern. So in my view, major power, each should not extend its 5G to the other country. Because none of us would have scientific proof. We cannot listen to others. We cannot do the surveillance. While we cannot prove, it cannot listen. It says it has no backdoor, but you need to demonstrate you have no backdoor. Huawei has no way to demonstrate. US has a legitimate concern Huawei may have, but the US has no proof Huawei has. US has no ability to prove Huawei is listening. Then Huawei should never go to the US. It's up to the US to beg for China. Please come. Without Huawei, we will be a backward developing country. China said no, because I may undermine your security. I would never go. And China should never ask an American IT company to come to China. If they come to China, we should say no. Our national security will be undermined. Where we go to some country, they never care national security. They think they are so peaceful. They would not never invade other country, and China, US are friendly. They would never invade them, even if they would listen to this country. I think there are plentiful of this such country. US asked Japan not to build a nuclear weapon. US does not need to ask many other countries not to build a nuclear weapon, because even you ask them to build, they don't want to build. So there is a problem because Huawei cannot prove, it cannot steal. Huawei is suspected. And the US cannot prove Huawei can steal, so US make its assumption to be the foundation of the policy to repair Huawei. Huawei and the Chinese government feel unfair. Each of us should wear the shoe of the others to think for others. Then China, US would have less problem. That's my view. China, US can reduce problem. But when China has the best 5G, China is eager to go to every country. And many countries would develop a concern. India may prepare for a war that with or without our border clash, India may be very apprehensive. If Huawei would lay the 5G network, Modi's cell phone conversation with its military men would be listened by Huawei, and Huawei would ship the signal to Beijing. Beijing would use one of the fastest supercomputers to interpret. India would have no national security. China should deny India to invite India to go to India for 5G. This is my view. So India would never condemn China. Why you come? India would say the 59 kind of electronic program, APP, should no longer provide service in China. If we never go to India, they will never complain. We should wait for them to invite. If you don't come, I would die. This is my answer, because this kind of IT, the user, the operator cannot prove these are innocent. The user cannot prove this must be harmful. Therefore, at a fast communicating age, for two countries, they are preparing for a war. China, US preparing for a war in the Taiwan Strait. China, India preparing for war in the disputed land. China, Japan preparing for a war in the island of Senkaku. It's better for them not to have such exchange of technology.
Let me move to the next questions. There's another question. Yes.
Can I just throw in, because I want to say, there is an alternative that has been raised in the 5G. That is going to be an immense issue, as Professor Shen mentioned, as countries sort of revert to 5G because it so undergirds the technology in various countries. And that is turning to Finland, Nokia.
Yes.
I mean, this is one of the world's best, technology companies. Finland has learned from its years next to the Soviet Union how to handle it and to preserve its independence. It is developing 5G, which I'm told is as good as anyone else. So this might, Professor Shen, I hadn't thought of that, but that's a brilliant idea, is advocate that various countries turn to Nokia. It has a fine record, it has a fine technology, some of the best players in the world.
South Korea has one of the best 5G as well.
Which company is that?
South Korea.
Which company?
What company? Samsung.
Samsung, yeah.
Samsung is very competent.
The difference is that South Korea has a close security relation.
So China does not feel confident. But India can invite Nokia.
Yes, Nokia. It'd be perfect.
American 5G company.
Okay.
Well, if I were India, you'd probably turn to Nokia.
So let me move to the question because we have lots of questions. First is from Professor Shen Dingli. Can you discuss China's Tibet policy and how it is different from that of the United States and West? What is your prediction? Second is also to
Could you repeat what's the first part of the question? China's policy, what policy?
China's Tibet policy, Tibet.
Oh, Tibet policy.
And second is, do you see the possibility of Cold War between China and United States like Soviet and US had in the past? Let me briefly raise one question to Professor Walter Andersen. He has a question on, do you see some implication for India-US relation if Trump were to lose the election in coming presidential election? And one more question to Shen Dingli. Do you think that the future world order would be based on bipolarity of China and the US?
Tibet became a part of China in a certain way 800 years ago, during Mongol Empire time. Mongol conquered current China. Mongol also conquered current Tibet. So one leader led the two parts. When Han Chinese restored our rule through Ming Dynasty, we inherited this area. And in Qing Dynasty, our government made an arrangement. We send limited military, we send like a high official as the central government delegate, but we don't send a significant military. And we approve the leader they choose through religious means. And during communist leadership, some of them, his traditional pattern of Central China and Tibet had a further change. And India may not feel very happy, but through our diplomatic work, India and China eventually accepted that Tibet belonged to China by India recognized. And China recognized the former Sikkim a part of India. So we have this political work which make both countries make an agreement. But still China promised to have the high autonomous treat in Tibet. So some American people may blame China may not honor its commitment. US is not saying Tibet is not a part of China. Even the Tibetan leader in exile, Dalai Lama, is not saying Tibet is not a part of China. He said China should honor its commitment to make the region highly autonomous. So some of us may have disagreement over this. So I think we try to listen and we try to accommodate whenever there is room to improve, to honor our constitution, because our constitution really said highly autonomous region, not only Tibet, but also in some other Chinese place where minority is dominant people there. So this is my answer on our Tibet issue. And the other question about a future possibly bipolar. Well, if we look at history, history tells it keeps changing. Sometimes you design a system, you made it. Sometimes you never design, but it would happen. But in the past, all world order changed. This current world order, US one power dominating, is totally different from the previous order. Before 1991, the order was US Soviet. And before 1945, there was no such Soviet US bipolar. Soviet was very poor. Soviet became developed because US helped the Soviet Union in its industrial development. But the Soviet Union denied the US Marshall Recovery Program because the US wanted the Soviet Union to do market economy. China initially also denied it, but then China opened it to introduce some of its economy as market economy. So China succeeded. But the Soviet Union denied it. They never know this would make them to Soviet Union to disappear. If they have the US help, if they have the market economy, if their people are happy with a mixed economy and market economy, probably they have still quite a big creativity. They're still there. And we don't have the US single power dominance. You never know. I never know what the future order will be. At least I don't think China has the realistic design. We design a China-centric, one power future. US is nothing. China is a replacement of the US. I don't think we have design. We are not even close to the China-US to core superpower. To be core superpower, you need to overcome many challenges. Education and scientific innovation. Not to copy, not to steal, but innovative. China does not have the talents. We don't have the talents to do chip. We don't have the talents to do the engine. Either civilian airplane or a car, the passenger car engine. These are very sophisticated. China cannot do the first race. So when the US decide not to give chip to Huawei, Huawei may die in 6 months. Our president called President Trump to save the life of ZTE, Zhongxin, to pay $1.4 billion to save it for its past relationship with Iran. If US would list China to its Commerce Department, possible future like Wasnell or Kokon, to list entire China, not just the 33 entity, entire China as a country, as an entity. Entire China cannot access the best, the top rate chip. US chip maker may collapse because they have no, China cannot buy them. They have the overwhelming capacity to produce, but China has money China cannot buy. And US would ask all friends, South Korea, Taiwan, Japan, UK, as long as they use US software and US parts, their chip cannot be sold to China. So China's gap with US, now probably 15 years, would be enlarged to 20 years, 30 years. I would never think China is having a blueprint to have a China-US co-leadership, to world order, to world leader. I don't think. Especially now when China is confronting with US on trade, on education, on Taiwan, on Hong Kong, on Kelowna, on Tibet, on almost everything. China's chance to be close to US would be more slim. That's my pessimistic projection.
Professor Walter Andersen, would you like to comment on the question of Trump's?
Right. Does it make any difference who wins the next election in terms of, I take it, the person who wrote the question, relations to India? I don't think so. Relations normally go beyond a particular person. It'll depend on economic and strategic circumstances. Just take the China issue, for example. The two parties are at one, and Professor Shen mentioned some actions that were taken in the Congress, which had virtually unanimous support. Anti-Chinese actions had virtually unanimous support by the two parties. And at the same time, both parties tend to be very sympathetic to India in terms of the Himalayan issue as well. So no, I don't think it'll make much difference. One has to remember that in the last election, Hillary Clinton was a known factor in wanting to develop a closer relationship with India. And in fact, in a speech in Chennai, she had asked India to speak up to be more assertive to China, as a matter of fact. And many Indian strategic thinkers took that into consideration. President Trump has never gone that far. Now, I don't think that Biden will as well, but I don't think there'll be all that much difference between the two in terms of relationship of the US to India.
Let me ask another question to Professor Walter Andersen, because Professor Shen Dingli I think he has got a call. What will be the impact of deteriorating relations of China and US on India?
Interesting question, which Professor Shen actually addressed in his remarks, somewhat addressed that question. It may have, in unforeseen ways, the US is more likely to be sympathetic to India on the border issue as a consequence, and providing, both arms and other kinds of agreement. For example, the Quad, the US might, come out more strongly in favor of Quad cooperation with India than it might otherwise have done. It would have some impact, but relations with China, I think you have to get beyond the rhetoric to find out what are the actual reasons. And I use the Indian-China example now. At the time of the Doklam issue, Indian ministers went to China, Chinese ministers came to India. Trade continued between the two countries because it was in the mutual advantage of the two countries. And I can tell you, India, with its 1.3 billion people, is attractive to Chinese industry, particularly certain elements of Chinese industry. Some basic development issues in China are done, wiring, poles, that sort of thing. Huge companies in China develop. They don't have business anymore. I don't know how many times people contacted me on the false assumption I spoke to Modi every other day, which I don't. I've only spoken to him a couple times, in saying, we want to develop a market in India for our product because we don't have a market anymore. So you've got that factor going as well, in that India provides a very attractive market, and particularly if it develops at the rate it hopes to, it's going to have enormous amount of business open for it. Now, business for China, yes. It's no secret that one of the Ambani, half of the Ambani family, got huge loans from Shanghai Electric to develop many of the hydroelectric facilities in Uttar Pradesh and Bihar. So on the one hand, people might say, oh, we have to be more independent of China, people in India. On the other hand, much of that business is actually good for India. I've heard some Chinese say, oh, we have to be very careful. We're giving too much money to India. And we're developing, letting India develop to a point it can be a danger to us. So, you have that. But I think, that it's mutually beneficial to Chinese investors and manufacturers, and it's beneficial to India as well.
Let me move to Professor Shen Dingli again. According to the latest sanction bill passed in the United States regarding humanitarian investigations in Xinjiang, China, what can we expect with, what can be Chinese response to it? Second is, in your opinion, what kind of regional economic environment does China need to its ambition in Asia, specifically in order to avoid direct conflict with the US? And that is the second question. Third is on Quad, what is China's stand on quadrilateral? And fourth, how China and US will manage to deal with the clash of interest situation in Indian Ocean region. Almost seamless, so I've clubbed it together.
I cannot remember everything, but let me try to answer some of them. Xinjiang is a part of China. If our friend would differ with us at a personal level, I cannot speak for my government. I welcome my friend to raise this issue to me. Bluntly, friendly, directly, or politely. Sometimes we say, your best friend is your enemy. And you disagree with me, I don't assume you are evil. I think you have a real question, real criticism you want me to improve. That's my position at a personal level. But at a state level, it's very difficult to say, welcome your criticism. Because you care politics, you care faith, you care respect. You would think a blunt criticism, with or without reason, is all unacceptable because it is not per political protocol. political protocol, the UN said, mutual respect. So how to respect me? My people would think if you criticize me, you are not respecting me. So I need to educate my people. Other people criticize me because they love me. This is very difficult to educate. So I would rather save my work to educate my people. I would just holistically to say, don't touch my soil, don't touch my turf. It's my cheese. So it's my internal issue. It's my sovereignty. So China says, this is internal affairs, meaning internal affairs is sovereign issue, and sovereign cannot be addressed by foreign country. But meantime, you see, China used to say, don't talk to me on human rights, but the China-US used to have human rights dialogue. It's no longer US monologue. US say, why you are bad? If you continue to have problem, I'm going to impose sanction. Bill Clinton used to link China's so-called China's human rights, not the Xinjiang, entire China's human rights, to the US provision of the most favored nation treaty. It's the same. But he later wrote an article printed by Los Angeles Times saying, this is not effective. This is not bad, but China is not listening. I really cannot raise the tariff on Chinese goods to America. Is that force China to raise Chinese tariff for American export to China? So he said, from today on, I'm going to delink China's human rights and US most favored nation treaty. And later on, China joined the WTO, so US treated China in a most favored way with all other equal members of the WTO. And China also gives the US most favored nation treaty. But that treaty level is different from American treaty level because China is a developing country. China still is allowed to raise its tariff a bit higher, probably by this time 8%. But with tariff war, China raised it to 10% or maybe to 20%. And the US gave low 2%, but with tariff war 25%. So this is to link politics and economy. But just to use economy to compound on economy. But with Xinjiang, US want to choose a different way, not a tariff, but personal punishment, because he work on this. Xinjiang regional leader, he is ordered to do, and also he is personally willing to do. But you have to personally take a damage. And also his family, that's very unfair. Why his family, his son, his spouse should be deprived of the US B1/B2 10-year visa, and they cannot travel to US? That's unfair. But this shows the US political correctness, because the US has a slogan, not Black Lives Matter, but global life matter. Why Xinjiang people life do not matter? So US would impose Xinjiang life matter, Uyghur life matter. But America still at home has lots of problems. China never imposed our law because Black life are not fairly treated. China would say, oh, your guy working on this human rights issue, police officer would not be given a visa to China, and your family people will not be given. It's silly. It does not look smart. What important is to have dialogue. If China-US still maintain human rights dialogue, and now this time it's China to take initiative, I think you have a problem. I think you should improve. And US say, you have problem. Let's have this kind of talk without using loudspeaker. In my view, this is political correctness. Talk without openly embarrassing others. Talk understanding others' cultural sensitivity. So I hope this kind of talk, China should not be shy to talk, because we don't interfere into others' Internal Affairs. This place, our CCTV and People's Daily always talk about American coronavirus. Why you have such a poor performance? It's got nothing to do with China. It's the U.S. domestic governance, U.S. sovereign issues. China should never give any comments. We should only report the data, but without any comments. China gives lots of comments. It's interference of U.S. internal affairs. Why? It's because it punished China on Tibet, on Xinjiang, on Hong Kong in such an aggressive U.S. making law to punish China. Why China cannot use government media to say some dirty things, nasty things of the U.S.? So China's embarrassment of the U.S. is far less. But in my view, it's still not constructive. Let's resume our bilateral talk on many things. Talk may not resolve the difference, but without a talk, we are going to be more emotional. No good to manage a relationship. Thank you very much.
So we are almost come to the end of the time. Would you like to respond on Quad? Like, what is China's stand on Quad?
Me or
yes.
Walter?
Maybe you, because the question is.
You're in a better position to answer that.
Maybe both of you can respond on what is, how you would like to respond on Quad. Like how China and US will manage to deal with clash of interest situation in the Indian Ocean region, and the question on Quad.
Let me respond first. Quad initially was not clear what it means. It says we share value. And China also share value to make Chinese people live better, to clean our environmental dirt, to make our ecology sustainable, to save our people from flood. US military also does this. So say China and US do not share value. I don't agree. We share value of market economy, but we don't understand, we don't believe market economy is only good. All economy should be market. Government sometimes should intervene, like US government under Obama intervened in the US stock market. US inject more money for financial liquidity. It's a government intervention. I would not say it's a planned economy, but at some time, US has a mixture. And the European capitalist country has more mixture. They call themselves as the state of capitalism, America as the free capitalism. And China is a mixture. They say socialism and capitalism. We say mixture of market economy and the state-owned economy. We think this is better, best because it is a balance. It is not extreme. It's a balance. But who knows? You may think China is not the best or even not good. And the other thing is that Americans want to use Quad to sustain the freedom of navigation. China, US has the same interest. American warship used to save Chinese commercial ship in Indian Ocean at a time when the Gulf of Eden had lots of terrorism. Indian warship used to help a Chinese rocket ship when we requested help. Nearby, their Indian warship came to spare the terrorists. So why they want to uphold the value? They want to make the sea lane of communication freely accessible. What undermine China's interest? So I don't buy the argument. It's designed to be against China. No, because if the sea lane is free, China now is a big user of the sea lane. And in the future, maybe the #1 user. We need the Indian Navy to make the Indian part of Indian Ocean free. We need America to make the entire Indian Ocean and Pacific Ocean free. But China and US may fight a war in Taiwan. If Taiwan would declare independence, independence, then China needs to use the national anti-secession law to fix it. And America has its national law, Taiwan Relation Act, to fix it. So China and US may unfortunately become the prisoner of Taiwan's reckless independence movement. Therefore, China, US can be victim by Taiwan. So US want to help Taiwan, but eventually can be hurt by Taiwan. And both countries have nuclear weapons. We cannot fight a war. Even an incidental collision can spiral up. So it's crucial for China and US to maintain military dialogue. Even if we are very unhappy with each other, we need to professional dialogue. That's why Yang Jieshi went to Hawaii to have dialogue with Mr. Pompeo. That may not help to resolve problem, but at least that would help to make each other's position clear, so we may be able to understand how to avoid the further escalation of our tension. The Quad, if China would have a dialogue with Quad, I hope India, Japan, and Australia would push the White House, Pentagon, to have the Quad plus China dialogue. US said, your building of the artificial land reclamation in South China Sea is a kind of behavior of blocking sea land communication. China may explain not. We never disallow American ship to sail too close to this structure. And even if American warship will sail into the territorial water of Plazo, we disagree, but we never shoot a bullet. We want what like a US ship to sail through quickly, because in the passage, you cannot stay. You cannot sail slowly. You have to move naturally. So China would say, I am not bothered by freedom navigation. And someday I may do my own version of freedom navigation. But let's have dialogue. The more dialogue would make China to understand what would be the worst consequence if China and Quad would have a problem. So China may be less prone to let something happen. But the four members of the Quad may understand they may overplay some game that may make China unnecessarily overreact. That's how I look at the Quad.
Thank you, sir. May I now request Professor Walter Andersen to give his remarks on Quad?
Well, the Quad's a very interesting idea. In India, until recently, genuflected to the Quad notion, but with no enthusiasm. Since the problem on the border with China, it has become more enthusiastic about Quad, and so has Australia, as a matter of fact, become more enthusiastic and have begun participating in the Malabar exercises, naval exercises as well. Obviously, a major purpose of Quad is to play a balancing role in Asia. And the question is, maybe they should start talking, and I totally agree with Professor Shen, they should start talking about the issues which, divide them and legitimately divide them. One, of course, is one that Professor Shen has mentioned, more relevant to India, and that is the road that's going from China through Pakistan, through part of Pakistan that India claims is its own. And the Indians argue that the Chinese would equally be upset if somehow they worked out a deal with the Russians to build a road across Western China. It could be considered to be, somewhat threatening, and so the Indians do as well. I'm not sure what's going to happen to that issue because obviously Pakistan is important in many ways to China, but it's one that has created problems and it's made the Indians more willing to be cooperative with the Quad. It's also driven the Indians closer to the US than I think many Indians would have wanted a few years ago, and certainly the Chinese would have wanted a few years ago. So in terms of Quad, it seems to be that there's a correlation. The worse relations are with China, the greater the Indians are for Quad, and the same is true with Australia. The Japanese remain strong supporters of Quad as well for basically reasons of competition with China. And the question is how, to talk out, the differences. Differences will never go away. But I think it's important, as Professor Shen mentioned, to engage in a dialogue to see if you can avoid differences that can be dangerous in terms of strategic issues. Now, I want to say something before I didn't. It's kind of in answer to a previous question that Professor Shen mentioned. It's how the countries talk to each other. And in his comments, he noted that often the West, the US in particular, have had a somewhat arrogant attitude in addressing themselves to China. And I think that's true. I have, in my interaction, particularly in India, but certainly in China as well, there is a certain cultural norm that you don't insult another person, that you handle them politely. And if you don't, and that's not necessarily true in the West, because the West is often built, both legally and politically, on confrontation. Much of the East is not. It's built on cooperation rather than competition. And that's a huge difference, because people can misinterpret, a remark which is not meant to be nasty, but can come across as nasty. Married to an Indian, I have learned long ago that one has to be very careful in what you say, that it does not appear to be condescending. And I think that we in the West have, in the past, have often dealt with the Chinese and Indians in ways that, didn't get ahead. So I think we have to be more careful. I used to teach a class at the Foreign Service Institute to Foreign Service officers, and this was always part of the class, is that especially when addressing people in the East, you have to be careful. You have to be careful that you don't insult, that you don't disparage them, that you let them know that you respect them for what they are. And I said, before having official discussions, this I said to the businessmen who were there, always try to know people. People in the East, want to know who you are, and they will trust you if they feel that you're worthy of the trust and are willing to be cooperative, instead of just going into a business. And we often make this mistake in business. I think the Chinese are better at this than we are, from what I've seen, is they really make an effort to sort of socialize before trying to get down to business. A typical American will go into a business meeting. Okay, let's decide what the point is. That's not going to work. I think so. We have to learn, the cues that we have in our ability to talk to one another.
Thank you, sir. Here we come to the end of the program. Professor Shen Dingli, Professor Walter Andersen, thank you very much for your time. It was an interesting discussion and we learned a lot. Thank you for joining us in spite of a busy schedule. And I'd also like to thank all our participants for their questions. There were more questions, but we could not accommodate because of the time constraints. Thank you, everyone. Have a nice day, Professor Walter Andersen, and good night to everyone. Thank you.
Good morning here.
Oh, good morning there.